So I want to transition to the Golden State Warriors and the Memphis Grizzlies. Game 4 is tonight. It's been reported that Ja Morant likely won't play tonight. It's not definitive, but there's a strong likelihood that he will not be available tonight. He got injured in the third quarter of Game 3 against the Warriors on Saturday night, a game that the Warriors won 142 to 112. But Ja didn't return midway through the third quarter. So I picked the Golden State Warriors to win this series in six games. I just felt that their talent, that their experience, that their overall refinery at this stage of the postseason would prevail over Ja's individual heroics. Because as great as Ja is, I didn't think he individually could power and propel the Grizzlies to the Western Conference Finals. Now, obviously, he was able to do that in Game 2. But for an entire series, I thought it would be really tough for him to sustain. And I also predicted and expected that every game would be extremely competitive, would be extremely testy, it'd be narrow, there'd be clutch shot making, and that's what we've been getting. And so far, what we saw Game 1 really kind of set the tone and highlighted what we were all anticipating and what we were all expecting. 1-point win for the Warriors, 117 to 116. You had stars being stars. The best was required, and the stars shined the brightest. It was competitive. It was back and forth. It was chippy, which is what we all expected. That's what we got. And yet, at the end of the day, what was it overshadowed by? It was overshadowed by Draymond Green's second quarter ejection after hard fouling Brandon Clark. And now, instead of effusively praising Ja Morant for his 47-point performance in Game 2, and instead of praising the Warriors' absolute dominance in Game 3 at home, in which they blew out the Grizzlies by 30 points, instead of all that, it's all been overshadowed by hard fouls, injuries, and the NBA's officiating. And that just disgusts me. I hate that these performances have been marred and have been stained by narratives being perpetuated and by storylines that shouldn't be storylines taking over the front page of newspapers, of tabloids, of sports talk shows as topics, because we go from Game 2 is the Dillon Brooks ejection game, and Gary Payton II ends up fracturing his elbow, and obviously it's important to talk about the impact of his loss, the impact of his absence with the Warriors, and what that means, because it's important. And he was the primary defender of Ja. But then what it did was it stripped us of being able to be in awe of Ja Morant's masterpiece. That 47-point performance in Game 2 was legendary from a guy who's trying to prove himself in the NBA, who's ascending in the league. And all of that was glossed over to debate whether or not Dillon Brooks should have been ejected or not. And then that's when you bring Steve Kerr into the equation, and he calls it a dirty play and that he broke the code, and all the players have to chime in, and the coaches have to respond to the players chiming in. And then the players have to respond to the coaches responding to the players, responding to the refs chiming in. And to me, I hate when that kind of infiltrates the storylines of games, because then we saw what happened in Game 3. Ja Morant is injured because Jordan Poole makes a questionably dangerous play, what appeared to be tugging at his knee. Now, do we know for a fact that was the cause of the injury necessarily? It certainly, I don't want to say definitively, but Ja Morant didn't return in the third quarter. So we can kind of deduce, well, probably the knee soreness flared up once it was tugged on. And now Ja Morant, we might be deprived of him in Game 4. And so what was the storyline again after game 3? It wasn't about the Warriors' performance. Was this a dirty play? And Ja Morant came out on social media. He commented on the view on the video, said broke the code, taking a shot at Steve Kerr, who was taking a shot at Dylan Brooks, who potentially was defending Brandon Clark after Draymond Green's ejection. So to me, I've never seen a discussion around a series revolve so much around the important and relevant but yet secondary takeaways from these games. I've never seen the discussion around outcomes be so swung and focused on the injuries and the ejections. I haven't seen those be so prominently featured before. It's so frequently discussed. Those elements are just so prominent right now in this series that we're overlooking the actual talent that's been played. Because again, we have Draymond Green's ejection. He immediately releases the emergency pod in the emergency basketball State of the Union. You got Dylan Brooks with the ejection. Should he or should he not be punished? Gary Payton's injury, how did that influence his punishment? Then Jordan Poole pulling at Ja Morant's knee. Now Ja Morant's unlikely to play in game 4. I just hate how it has seeped into this series because it has stained the image of this series. It's marred the performances that we've seen, which it should never do. It really should never do. I just hate that it's consumed and has been plastered all over the headlines of all these talk shows and newspapers and stories. And instead of talking about the play, we're talking about that. And again, not that it's not relevant, because it is. But that's been my biggest takeaway. All 3 games, you've got all this nonsense drama going on around it. And I hate that. I really hate that. So I hope that Ja Morant can play tonight. If he can't, I hope he can play for game 5. You never want to see any of the big-time players go down. But it is what it is. It is what it is.